Well, welcome everyone. Just want to thank you for attending OneSource's new webinar series in which we'll discuss key trending topics around cybersecurity. I'm Jeremy Canaday, Security Technical Accounts Manager here at OneSource. I've been with the company for a year and a half, and I brought with me an extensive career as an intelligence analyst for Department of Defense. With me is Steve Cobb, our resident CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Steve brings more than 25 years of leadership consulting surrounding IT infrastructure, cybersecurity, incident response, and cyber threat intelligence. Since joining the OneSource team in 2015, Steve's been responsible for providing strategic IT consulting, delivering increased organizational efficiency, and just increasing security posture, not only for our company, but most importantly, our customers. So welcome, Steve. Glad to have you today.
Good afternoon, Jeremy. Good to be here. Good to have this discussion. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Before we dive in, just want to give a little bit of framework here. So ransomware attacks are currently the #1 threat companies are facing, and that's regardless of size. Sure, at one point, it was billion-dollar corporations, a high intelligence value targets, and we're seeing that trend shift away from those elite companies to anyone that's handling sensitive information. Last year alone, the U.S. experienced more than 65,000 reported ransomware attacks. The global cost reaching a record-breaking $20 billion. We're seeing this ransomware becoming not just an attack, but more so a business, a corporation, if you will. We're seeing businesses go out of business, healthcare providers having to turn away patients, even seeing in some situations and cases, communities just being brought to a standstill. This type of shift in ransomware is what brought all of us to the call today, and rightly so. So what we hope to do today is talk about ways that you can actionably protect yourself against these attacks. Before we jump in, one quick housekeeping note. If you'll look in the middle bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. If you have specific questions during the webinar, please click that button, type in your question, and we'll be able to address those towards the end of the meeting for today. So Steve, as we dive in, one way I'd like to begin the conversation is if you can just give a short road to war of how did we get to where we are? How did we get to the fight that we're fighting against ransomware?
Well, Jeremy, I mean, ransomware is not a new phenomenon. Ransomware has been around for 30 years. In fact, the first kind of supported case reported was back in 1989. It's called the PC Cyborg ransomware virus. You can go look that up. Anyway, that was because the internet had not proliferated yet. That actually was spread via floppy disk. There may not even be people on this call that know what a floppy disk is. Anyway, but it was spread via floppy disk. Now, if you fast forward to 2006 and the evolution of cryptocurrency and the proliferation of the internet, now it's become an opportunistic business, as you mentioned. I think it's a great word to use there for these threat actors and attack groups to monetize areas where they can see exploits, vulnerabilities. And so really where we've come to now is that it's become a cash grab for these threat acting groups. They've made a business out of it, as you mentioned, on the crime forum. I mean, there's actually business plans that are written. In fact, one of the ransomware groups here in the last couple of weeks, they were themselves hacked, and their business plan was leaked on the internet. So you can go take a look at the things that they look at. They're wanting to target, how they do their base of operations, even how they've set up their own technical support infrastructure. So if you sign up with them as an affiliate, you can have access to this ransomware group's technical support to figure out how to deploy their ransomware and encrypt victims. So it has become purely a cash grab. And you can see the reason why that has grown to where it is because companies who are severely affected by ransomware and may not have done a great job with making sure they've got a disaster recovery, business continuity strategy in place. And even if they have, now the emergence of these companies who are also doing shameware, which means they not only encrypt your data, but they also steal your data and then publish it on the internet. So that could be intellectual property, it could be reputational damage, could be all kinds of things. These companies have just evolved now into the place where they can quickly and easily exploit companies who may have these vulnerabilities, or maybe who aren't doing a great job of keeping their security posture the way it should be. And most definitely, they don't have the ability to respond to an incident and recover from the incident. So there's going to be maximum hurt, maximum pain inflicted on these companies. And a lot of them, unfortunately, resort to the idea of paying for the ransom. And so, it's just like any other criminal. If they do one activity and it's a payday for them, they're going to keep doing that activity. And when you multiply the number, as you mentioned, 65,000 reported ransomware incidents last year, that's just reported. I've shared this with clients many times, is that for every colonial pipeline that you see published in the media, there's 250 smaller incidents that happen behind the scenes that you don't ever hear about, right? So it is a much bigger problem, and it has come to light a little bit because of the media's representation of it, but it's been around for a while, and now it's just kind of hit critical mass, if you will.
Understood. I know you mentioned the cash grab. So obviously the motivator here is, how can I make more money off of companies who allow me access? But who are the ones that are carrying out these attacks?
There's tech savvy groups that some work for foreign governments. So they documented cases. Many of the threat intelligence teams and companies have documented cases of threat groups who are also work for military intelligence, for instance. But they're mainly groups who get together and see that they have the ability to exploit some of these vulnerabilities in companies, and they know they can make a lot of money at it. When you see, for instance, we deal with a lot of incident responses. We were in one not long ago of a company that's fairly small. It's what you would consider a mom and pop, if you will. 50 employees, probably a company's been in business for 20 years or so, gets hit with ransomware, and the ransom is $5 million. I mean, so the amount of payout and treasure, if you will, that these ransomware gangs have access to when they inflict this damage is pretty tremendous. I think in the early days, I say not early days, earlier in this period we're in right now, where insurance companies were paying out, they were paying out on returns for claims against ransomware or cybersecurity incidents. Threat actors started to understand, well, hey, if I can just get somebody to pay, I'm going to make a pretty good living here. So it really ranges from people who are very sophisticated. You have these groups, as I mentioned, that have their own technical support teams, and they're extremely well organized. But you also have those groups which are much more disorganized. They're looking for, like I mentioned before, a quick crash grab. They may not have the whole back-end infrastructure behind them, but they can easily deploy these ransomware malicious techniques within a company to inflict maximum damage.
When we look at our environments today, and we look at all the pieces that we want to have connected and within our environment, and then also looking at sending data to the cloud. So in looking at the Internet of Things that we're placing inside our network, are they creating a greater security threat for ransomware? Does the usage of cloud, is that increasing risk? Like where do these elements fall in the ransomware discussion?
Yeah, I think those vectors are all potential sources for compromise or exfiltration, right? So not that those are bad things. Moving to the cloud is not a bad thing. Having IoT devices in your environment is not a bad thing, but they do introduce risk, right? And so we have seen specific cases. We've been involved in some incidents as of late where IoT devices were used as a pivot. So once attackers had a very novel approach, they were able to specifically exploit vulnerabilities on some IoT devices to then move and escalate privilege because of some of the access they had throughout the rest of the network. So those things do, they may be an actual vector for initial entry and initial compromise. They also could be a stronghold that attackers could use to either gain, as I said, escalation, pivoting to other parts of the organization, maybe even persistence. So they do the cloud as well. I think the cloud's one of those spaces where employees or companies really need to have a intentional strategy about how they're going to deploy the cloud, what they're going to put there, and how they're going to protect it. Because the cloud for a lot of companies now is a whole new world, and it's so easy to spin up machines and connect those cloud networks to your own on-premise networks, or even give access to your remote workers to cloud workloads that you've got because they're easy to deploy, but they introduce a tremendous amount of risk if you haven't thought through how you do that and what manner you provide security there. So I think, part of the reason why, not just IoT and cloud, but we still see ransomware actors really leverage a lot of the, I guess, places where there's poor execution on security programs, right? So what I mean by that is a lot of the low-hanging fruit for vulnerabilities. If you think about devices that might be exposed to the internet, companies that have admins who use their normal user credentials as their admin, and those get compromised. People who do use passwords across multiple environments and they get compromised, and so a breach occurs either through VPN or some other methodology. A lot of those low-hanging fruit are what the ransom actors are going for. And I'll step back maybe to that question you asked before about what's driving these and who's carrying them out. The ransomware actors really have money as their main goal, right? These are not usually nation-state actors. When we think about nation-state actors, and you probably heard them called APTs, those people are have motivations around maybe political gain, intellectual property theft, other more complex targeted approaches, and those are the groups that are have their own R&D, and they're backed by foreign governments and foreign intelligence, and they are extremely difficult to protect and defend against. But those attackers are going after very specific targets. Ransomware groups take a shotgun approach, and if you're vulnerable to them, they really don't care. They're just trying to get money, right? So they're just hitting everything they can, as much as they can, in order to inflict damage and get money. So everything becomes a vulnerability. Yes, IoT and cloud add another layer of that vulnerability, or another piece of that vulnerability. But if companies would do some basic hygiene, best practice on security, then they could alleviate a lot of that trouble that they get into from ransomware. And many times I've said that, as the internet has come up to speed and people are doing business on the internet, they've been doing business on the cloud, the companies, in order to accommodate convenience and connectivity, they've sacrificed security. And so that's the state we're in. And that's really started, 5 or 6 years ago as internet became prevalent, actually probably 9 or 10 years ago. Everybody wanted to get on the internet. They wanted to put their website up. They wanted to start doing business with remote workers, VPN, all those sorts of things. And security was not top of mind. So yeah, they got convenience. Yeah, they got connectivity, but at the risk of security. And so a lot of the companies that we come into after an incident has happened to try to help rebuild and put things back together, as we do a forensic investigation and find that the initial compromise, the vector for root cause, patient zero, was something that could have been easily remedied before this happened, if there was just some thoughtful strategy put around security and how it integrates with the business. So, back to that long-winded answer there, Jeremy, but back to your point, IoT and cloud do introduce risk, but we're not seeing attackers specifically go after that. They're very opportunistic in this ransomware world, and they're just looking at the quickest and the easiest way for them to make money. And they're gonna execute on that wherever they can find it.
Yeah, I really like the line about adding convenience, but not or by sacrificing security. That's a piece that often things appear like they're good for our business. They seem like they're going to make us more efficient, more effective, and yet they make us more vulnerable, which takes us into what are some practical pieces? What are the important layers that are needed when companies are looking at how can I stop these attacks or how can I prevent these ransomware attacks?
Well, I think first and foremost, companies need to just maybe take a step back and do that intentional, thoughtful process of looking at how we're doing business, what technologies do we have in place, and are we protecting those? Is anybody watching, right? We can't go to one of the solutions can't be, I'm going to buy this nice shiny new security tool and I'm going to put it in my environment, install it on all my endpoints or put it in my network, and then I'm protected forever. That's not the way it works, right? So you put that tool in, and it may be the best tool in the world, and start sending alerts out. But if nobody's watching and those alerts just happen, then attackers are still in the network. They're still doing whatever they want. So you got to have visibility, you got to have protection, and you got to have defense. But there are some basic security best practices and good hygiene that if companies did, they would reduce their risk by ransomware tremendously. Remember, as I said before, the ransomware groups are extremely opportunistic. And if you put roadblocks up, when they hit that first roadblock, what we've seen, and we've seen on the inside, we've seen companies that we protect and defend where attackers have hit the first roadblock and been stopped, and they just go away. And the reason is they're looking for the fastest money grab they can get, right? So if you put up some of these basic roadblocks to stop these ransomware actors in the very beginning, what we've seen historically happen is they pivot and they go to the next target because they've got billions of targets, right? So if you put one tiny roadblock in the way, they go and move on to something else. Now those roadblocks you have to put up may be many, but still there are the biggest holes, if you will, into the organizations can be protected by some pretty novel ideas. One of them is multi-factor authentication, right? If you do not have multi-factor authentication, let me turn that, please, if you've heard nothing else this entire time, and yes, I've talked a lot, so I'm sure a lot of you have probably fallen asleep, turned off, gone somewhere else. But for those of you who are still listening or will listen to this later, everything that you have access to that you have to log into with a username and password, crown jewels, critical data that you want to protect, you need to protect it with multi-factor authentication. No ifs, ands, or buts. You say, I can't do it, figure it out. Do something, figure out how you can protect that with multi-factor or at least some type of additional protection outside of username and password. And that's where we see things like VPN, Office 365 or G Suite, those areas where our employees are remotely able to log in to access company data or perform company tasks. We've quickly allowed that for our employees, and rightly so for the business. We're trying to move it at light speed. Everybody's trying to succeed and do greater things. But as I mentioned before, whenever you're accommodating convenience and connectivity at the sacrifice of security, you will be compromised. There's no doubt about it. So multi-factor is one of those things that is a novel approach, but people just say, I don't have time to get around to it. We got other things going on. Listen, this is one of the biggest things you got to do. Is you've got to turn on multi-factor authentication. If you're using Office 365, they provide it for you as part of the package. Go turn it on. But if you have a lot of different services, VPN and other things that allow external people access into your environment, then you need to protect that with some form of multi-factor authentication. That's first and foremost. Second thing is just good password hygiene. And so security awareness, those go a long way. For most business, it's an evolution of behavior across your organization. So, right, it's instilling into your organization, all your staff, your employees, what being secure aware looks like. So being suspicious of things, making sure you're protecting your password. So if I say password hygiene, not just talking about long, complex 50-character passwords that you have to remember, Although that's part of it, what I'm more saying is things like don't reuse passwords. Don't use the same password on your Netflix account on your VPN that you log into. That's a recipe for disaster. We were in an incident with a very large company not long ago, and that was the attack vector. As you probably saw, Jeremy, you may have saw this on the news. I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before, that T-Mobile got breached, and I don't know, what is it, 11 million customer information dumped on the internet. That's usernames and passwords, right? So the attackers are going to go scroll through that password dump, and when they find Jeremy Canaday, guess what they're going to do? They're going to go to LinkedIn and look up Jeremy Canaday. Where does he work? They've got his password now, so they're going to go try to log into a VPN or Office 365 as Jeremy Canaday, hoping that he used his password in more than one place. Now, I know Jeremy is highly security conscious and he does not do that, but you have people in your organization that probably are doing that. So making sure your password policies are such that you're rotating those, or that you're requiring complex or longer passwords than what people would traditionally use in their personal lives and their personal spaces, is another big piece of the puzzle. Around those, I'd recommend making sure to tell your employees about password managers, things like LastPass, OnePass, all those types of tools that are available out there. But then also think about using passphrases. The idea of a passphrase, using words that you put together in a phrase, much more effective than a random computer password that's generated that you are never going to remember. You're probably going to write it down, or else you'll do like we have been in instance. This actually did happen in a fairly large company long ago, where an attacker got access to an admin's desktop, and on that admin's desktop was a file called passwords.txt, and that admin had recorded all the organization's password on that file. So we did the forensics. We came back and said, wait a second, this attacker accessed this file called password.txt on your desktop. What was in that? And they said, basically all our passwords. And so then you've got to go through an entire cleaning house of scrubbing everything where those passwords may exist on network devices, SaaS platforms. Everything's got to change. So password hygiene, that is a good practice, and a practice to make sure that you instill in your organization. Another one is just vulnerability management. So more and more we're seeing exploits to get published on the internet, of where a device made by manufacturer, insert name here, now has a vulnerability, and attackers can utilize that vulnerability to get RCE, or remote code execution, and they can do things remotely on those devices that they could pivot into environments for. That's one huge thing that you just have to be aware of. And once again, thoughtful, intentional security program to make sure you keep abreast of those things, and you're patching both your desktop, your Windows and Linux and Mac OS devices, but also your network appliances, firewalls, VPNs. All those things are exposed to the internet. In past times, so you got something like a firewall or a VPN, you just felt comfortable that you could put it on your network and expose it to the internet, and that was a secure way for your people to get in, and you didn't have to worry about it as being a vulnerability. Those days have changed. I was at Black Hat a couple of weeks ago, and there was several exploits that were new that were introduced around appliances or other vulnerabilities that essentially allows an attacker to get on that appliance and do what they want to. That may give them access further into the network, it may not, but still making sure that you're patching those devices that are exposed to the internet as ingress points is part of your security program you have to be aware of. And then anything that you expose to the outside world through your firewall. I still am a little baffled and bewildered when I go out and do searches and look for things exposed on the internet, and I see things like remote desktop servers that are published out to the internet. And it's one of the main vectors that we've seen attackers do or use in order to pivot internally into a network. And when you expose those things and you don't monitor the activity or don't watch them, then you just open yourself up for compromise, because an attacker's got all the time in the world to just try to bang against it until they get access. So those are some trivial steps. Those are some basic steps, but if you put those roadblocks up, for the most part, attackers, as I mentioned, the ransomware gangs, when they hit that first roadblock, they're usually going to move on. Now, an APT group that's really after what you got or whatever, that there's even deeper things that you have to do there. But These ransomware groups are really opportunistic. And so a little bit of hindrance to them makes them not count you as a good target, and they move on to other targets.
Well, Steve, I definitely appreciate that. I know in looking at, most of those things are proactive pieces, right? Like we're going to put these in so that we can prevent. What would you say in the unfortunate event that somebody does fall susceptible? It's the oh crap moment.
Yeah.
What's the first step?
Well, the first step hopefully happened before this. And the first step hopefully is that you've done some kind of incident response planning and you're ready for the oh crap moment. The question is not if you're going to be compromised or breached. The question is when you're going to be compromised and breached. There used to be an old saying like there's two types of companies in the world: the companies who know they've been compromised and the companies who don't know they've been compromised, but they are, right? So really what that says is pretty much it's difficult, even for services like we offer or managed security services. It's difficult to protect and defend these days with so many opportunities out there for threat actors. But the first step is really to be realistic with yourselves and set up an incident response plan, a strategy, right? So that first step should happen before you ever get to this point. If your oh crap moment comes and you don't have any of that, then your first step really should be reaching out to an expert, reaching out to a group that can help you there. And I would say a practical step around that, Jeremy, would be that, as people that are sitting here really think through it, even if you don't have an incident response plan and you've done all that long process of doing tabletop exercises or other things, you should take some really easy steps right now and put these things in a place that your executive team or IT leadership, security leadership know where they are. So things like who's our cybersecurity insurance provider, who's an incident response provider that we can call if we have an issue, who's my legal team who has expertise in cyber insurance and cybersecurity issues that I can get on the phone, and have those numbers ready. So if you come to that oh crap moment and you say, we're not prepared, we're not doing anything, you can at least try to share that stress and anxiety with somebody who's been through it before. I've seen too many times. So we've been in incident responses where a company's been hit with ransomware and they had very capable folks internally from an IT standpoint. So they tried to fix the issue themselves. And a lot of times what happens there is you destroy some of the forensic evidence, some of the stuff that you really want to see so that you can protect yourself next time. So the part of that is making sure that as you bring those experts in, they know what to do and what steps to take. And so that's what I would say, Jeremy. If that oh crap moment comes, then who do I call? What do I do? How can I get people in here to help me?
Understood.
Yeah, and Jeremy, maybe you could speak to this as well. You're our security technical accounts manager. So as you talk and in the interface with a lot of our customers, what would you say, just from your experience, is the amount of percentage of companies that are ready for that oh crap moment, that instant response strategy?
It obviously it varies. Whenever I'm talking with customers, there are a few things I want to make sure are in place. One, how do we keep the junk out of our environment, which you covered on policies, passwords, just making sure everything is set up correctly, having something that's scanning email, right? Like that's first and foremost. Then I want to train my staff. Don't click on the stuff. I want them to make sure that the companies we work with are super educated there, and that their user base is making sure they're not clicking on the right things. And then following that up with making sure, hey, once bad actions do take place, something's in the environment, that the proper things are being viewed and alerted on so that action can be taken. But then when you move forward to a full build out disaster recovery or how we're going to do an incident response plan, I definitely see those percentages drastically reduced. Most companies, I would say, are not ready. First few conversations, who are they going to call to answer they don't know. So then
Yeah,
we talk
yeah.
to them about how can we go ahead and put that in place so that you know that answer, and
Yeah.
just working with them. So it's something I try to help build out, but typically it's not something I find in place when we have our first few conversations.
Yeah, and I'll say from real world experience, as our teams come in behind companies who've had a ransomware attack, and we try to help figure out the forensics and rebuild and remediate and rebuild and those sorts of things, that it's a completely different interaction with a company who's had this discussion before versus the company who has not had this discussion before. I mean, that may seem obvious to a lot of people that are on this call, but I'll tell you, when you come into that company who may be a company who's never had a budget item for security before, and all of a sudden they're breached, and you've got to start talking about security, that is a completely different discussion than the organization who's put some time and effort around thinking about instant response. What do I have in place? Am I monitoring things? Am I watching? Do I have the tools in place that I need for my environment? And am I protecting my crown jewels, right? Am I making sure that those things are safe and secure? So I'd encourage everybody to make sure that discussion happens as well. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Jeremy. I'll throw the question out to you to get your feedback, your spiel, and then I'll give it. Should a company pay the ransom? There you go. Answer that question, Jeremy.
There's a lot of fear that comes into that question, right? Like I don't want to answer it in a way that takes the fear and the shock and the pain that comes along with that moment when you realize somebody somewhere messed up.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I can get my business back, keep this from being a large scale issue by giving up some capital. You very well may be trying to pay someone that doesn't even have the keys needed to get your information back. So it's not a foolproof piece. You can't just get out of it by paying money. So I'm going to answer it that way, and then I'll let you take on from there, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, typically we always tell customers not to pay the ransom. Now that's easy for us as incident responder to say. I know that. I'm not blind to that point, and it's a valid point. It's all, you may have business justifications for things around where it weighs into that negotiation or that discussion. But I will say, been involved in many of those incidents after the fact, and went through that process for some companies who paid. Most of them and all of them, we recommended and told them not to pay. We had instances where people paid and they got keys back that worked, and their environment was back up to speed in a week. Medium-sized environments. Then we've had people who've paid and worked with some of those lower tier ransomware operators. Remember, you're dealing with criminals here, right? I mean, there's no SLA for them to get back to you on my decryptor key won't work, right? It's not like they're 24/7 and get right back to you. And I've actually been in those discussions with the ransomware groups about because we've had come into companies who said, hey, we paid and they've given us this ransom, this decryptor. Now take it and go use it to decrypt everything, and the decryptor actually not work. Or in the case of Colonial Pipeline, they paid for that $45 million for that decryptor, and the decryptor took so long, they were faster just to rebuild computers from scratch. So yeah, I've got this shiny decryptor key and I paid for it, and the threat actor has guaranteed me that it's going to decrypt my stuff, but it's not practical, right? I can't even use it. My business is going to be down so long. I've actually been in one of those and seen that happen, where the decryptor, you start on a computer and come back 3 days later and it's still running. I mean, businesses who are down, that doesn't help them per se. So, in those cases where you have no backup, you are completely unprepared. Maybe the ransomware actors have gotten into the environment. And we see this a lot today as well. They get into the environment and pivot over to a backup system and actually ransom that backup system. They encrypt that as well. So companies come in who don't have a backup strategy where they're keeping offline copies of data or doing a very systematic approach to disaster recovery. They have nothing to recover to. And in those cases, you may have to pay the ransom. But for generally what we tell customers is don't pay the ransom. You don't know what you're going to get. We have seen cases as well of the decryptor key actually itself having ransomware or malware in it. So you run that decryptor and say everything's fine, but now you've got a backdoor implanted on your computer. So that's a real thing that's happened before as well. So, it is a business decision. And I think overall, as we think strategy around ransomware and cybersecurity as a whole, this is really a business problem. It's not an IT problem, and it's not a security problem. It's a business problem that we need to address by using the tools and the techniques available and partners that have expertise and knowledge to bring them in and bring it to bear to protect our organizations far and wide.
Excellent, Steve. We are going to open it up for questions. If your specific question has not been answered yet and you do want to drop it in that Q&A, please go ahead and do so, and we'll try to answer any of those before we conclude. One question I did want to ask, Steve, when looking at different verticals, whether it's healthcare, financial, any of the other verticals out there, do you see any of them particularly being targeted at a greater rate for ransomware?
So specifically ransomware, Jeremy, I'd say no, right? As I mentioned before, kind of that opportunistic approach that threat actors take. They're going to attack, whatever they can. And what you see, though, are the results of that is a lot of times those are industries that may be lagging behind the curve on security. So if you remember 3 years ago or so up through there, we had a ton of ransomware incidents that happened against education organizations. So K through 12 schools, universities, the education sector, there has been lagging behind, if you will, security ways. No disrespect to anybody, but just has. And so you saw ransomware actors have more success there, but it didn't mean they were just specifically targeting them. It just meant that in the web of turmoil and pain that they threw out, those are the ones they grabbed because they were maybe they didn't do those security programs or have intentional strategies around it. So we don't have data that suggests that any groups are going after specific industries per se. I think what does happen is those industries that may be traditionally lagging behind in security awareness and security maturity in the programs probably become ensnared in that web of ransomware more often than not. So you see those, they bubble up to the top because they're hit.
Understood. Well, for today, that's going to wrap up our discussion. Don't head off just yet. We do have an offering at the end that we'll cover, but I just want to mention that we will be sure to reach out to each participant today at the close of the webinar via email. And that way you can reach back out to us and get any questions. If you did not populate it in the Q&A that we can answer for you, we will be happy to do so. So Steve, I will turn it over to you and let you know what the participants for today have the opportunity to take advantage of.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know, we really covered this, Jeremy, in the beginning, and this is not a sales pitch or anything, but OneSource does offer managed security and managed IT services to clients. And it's for those participants, specifically this webinar, we're offering a ransomware assessment at a discount to the participants here. So if you're interested in that, reach back out to our team. We essentially will come in and do an assessment in your environment. It actually is somewhat like a automatic pen test that targets the TTPs, the specific tools, techniques, and procedures that ransomware actors use in order to infiltrate and then propagate ransomware within organizations. And so we can use that tool to look in your environment and say, here's some places, that low-hanging fruit I mentioned before, here's some places that an attacker could potentially pivot to or either gain access to your environment on with and then ransom your environment, encrypt things for ransom. So if that offer intrigues you, if something you're thinking about doing, maybe you just want to have a good hygiene check, reach back out to our team. We've got the information that'll be presented, and everyone that's registered, we have your contact information. So we'd love to offer that to you. The mission of for me personally and professionally and for OneSource as a whole is to try to protect and defend as many organizations as we can. And so we want to be partners with companies who want to have that difficult discussion about security strategy, how to implement it, what can we do, and we can try to help put these roadblocks up to keep ransomware actors away from our businesses.
Fantastic. Well, Steve, thank you for today. I enjoyed the discussion.
Me as well.
For everyone that attended, just want to thank you as well. And please stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.